Hi everyone, I'm Sam from Eagle Vision. I'm here again with James Polacek. James, welcome.
Thank you.
And we're talking about buying land in SA. Last time we talked about some of the higher level kind of ideas around Adelaide and growth and where things are happening. This time around, we'll actually delve a little bit more into the specifics of where to buy land. So, as a first question, James, where is the growth actually happening?
I think the easiest answer is all over, but
Okay.
perhaps more significantly to the south and to a lesser extent to the north of Adelaide.
Okay.
We've had a miniature boom to the north, and that is partly because of availability of land via government releases. That's still occurring. My personal favourite is south of Adelaide, just because I think it is a tighter land availability just by virtue of our hills, the way they tuck in towards the coast. But also the coastal lifestyle extends better to the south than it does to the north.
Of course.
And we do have more government land releases and some really interesting infrastructure projects that I suspect get announced this year and beyond.
Down south.
That's down south, yeah.
Yeah, look, obviously the drivers are always about demand and supply. So if the supply is limited and demand is the same, then theoretically prices should increase, right?
Look, that's exactly right. I think, if you drum it down to basics, that's all that really counts. I think probably just by virtue of landscape that exists better down south. It exists to a lesser degree as well in our Adelaide Hills. Mount Barker is a really good employment centre in its own right.
Sure.
Slightly less limited in land, and most of the land there has to come via private releases rather than government releases. So
like a farm.
Correct. Yeah.
Design. Yeah.
Rezonings are crucial for that sort of area, but then of course the government has some sort of control as well. So I personally think that the best and biggest and most significant infrastructure projects are happening to the south, certainly in the near future. But like anything, that ebbs and flows, and particularly with your larger land subdivisions, given the long lead time for such projects, you do need to look further ahead than the next 2 or 3 years. So all three of those spots are, in my opinion, prime for growth.
Yeah, cool. So let's sort of pull back a little bit from that and talk a bit about the infill. So what is actually happening in Adelaide? How is it that, and where are those sort of infill sites possibly available?
So Adelaide metro area is really interesting. I think we have this weird scenario where east of Adelaide is our leafy exclusive suburbs, if you will, the blue chip suburbs, and they have retained their value and growth better than others for a long period of time. What that means today is there's a great opportunity in the western suburbs between the city and the beach, which in other states in Australia and other cities in the world would
not be possible.
The highest value property in that state or city. So for that doesn't exist. We have some great opportunities just northwest of Adelaide. Bowden rings a bell as a master planned government project, which is
that's something like 5 kilometres out of the CBD, or at least.
It's probably only 1 to 2 kilometres outside of the CBD, on the other side of our Parklands ring. It's an old industrial site that has been fully remediated now, and probably about 50% through its construction master plan vision, which is about 10 years in. So the growth there has been astronomical in recent years, and it outperformed most other Adelaide metropolitan suburbs. But Renewal SA, our government up and in charge of land acquisitions and disposals, they've also purchased our old West End Brewery site, which is due to probably come to market for individual developers to be party to that next stage in the coming years. So lots and lots of growth, which is, and that, by the way, that site is adjacent to Bowden, really. So still really within 1.5 kilometres of our CBD. Perfect proximity for workers, fantastic public transport, walkability. Our parklands, which encircle our CBD, which is quite unique, are fantastic because they are literally across the road. So that's a fantastic.
And they prevent possibly the building out and the blocking of the views if you're in some of the higher.
So for medium density and apartments, certainly we do our fair share of those. But when we're talking to owner-occupied buyers especially, they're looking for security and views.
Sure.
So the fact that some of these sites are river-fronted, some of them are parklands-fronted, that is
massive pluses.
That's the best insurance you can buy.
Of course. So, all right, so Bowden is one area. How about some of the other things, like some of the automotive facilities that are no longer?
Most people probably know that Adelaide was home of Holden for some period of time. That was in our, I wouldn't say inner north, but in our northern suburbs, and we had a significant facility out that way. A private developer has actually taken on that site, and we have some really interesting things occurring out there. So I believe there's a mushroom farm on site. And the mushroom industry, I'm by no means an expert, but is actually incredibly diverse. They have all sorts of adjacent products which are not just selling mushrooms. Another part of that site is very involved with the cannabis industry. So and not necessarily just medicinal marijuana, but again, not an expert. There's some really interesting industries growing out that way, which are involved in the repurposing of industrial sites.
So they're not exactly changing from industrial use to residential. They're staying industrial, just a different use of it.
Absolutely, it's a pivot. So certainly there will be land which is perfect for residential division, and I suspect will end up being the case. But the way that area has pivoted to change and remain self-supporting when they may have lost XYZ amount of jobs. They've created new jobs with different industries.
Interesting.
And arguably more sustainable jobs because our automotive industry wasn't going so great.
And I saw what happened at Tonsley. That's another one of these sort of Mitsubishi big plant changing over into industrial/residential. But that's a completely different thing. Maybe you want to share a bit about that?
So Tonsley is different again. That's south of Adelaide. That project is well underway. But again, it was a significant repurposing of an industrial facility. So Mitsubishi used to be based down at Tonsley. That was their manufacturing plant. That is now home to Flinders University, Commercialisation Australia, along with a whole bunch of other, I think startup is probably the wrong term, but growing either tech or other similar style
kind of
businesses. There's also a significant portion of residential development happening in that area as well. So Pete, who is a national developer, they've taken on that project and they're a significant way through it.
Look, that's the thing that in the north, I wasn't sure what was actually going to happen to the Holden plants, but down south, I've seen the residential buildings sort of encroach that little bit of commercial and industrial stuff. So it's interesting how things gentrify, I suppose.
Absolutely. And it's all about proximity to the city. So I think Tonsley probably sits about 9 to 10 k's from the CBD. The old Elizabeth plant for Holden is probably a touch further out. And in general, the residential properties in the area are slightly lower. So it's perhaps less viable for residential subdivision. But we have such a great resource of workers out that way that it's perfect for the way it's being used.
It's a big employer driver, absolutely. So what are, I guess, some leftover infill opportunities, if there are any, like that?
I think for Adelaide, the northwestern corridor, if you will, has previously been a manufacturing centre for Adelaide. If I seek the history of Adelaide, where Port Road used to be this, or still is this, great transport corridor between the CBD and our port down near North Haven, and Osborne, which is our shipbuilding facility and submarine. That still is the case, but we have lost some of our manufacturing industry. So as these sites are remediated and repurposed, these are actually fantastic brownfield, if you will, or urban infill opportunities for residential property.
And how about density? Obviously, when we're talking about infill, what can developers do?
So it changes per location, of course. However, we have zoning called urban corridor zoning, which was a strategic rezoning by the state government, perhaps in the last 5 to 10 years, which has identified various main arterial routes, routes in all directions of the CBD to allow for higher density property development. That doesn't mean they're all viable, but it gives property developers and owners an opportunity to consider that. So that we can actually achieve higher density along main transport routes, because of course they're the ones that have taken highest priority.
Of course. No, that's understandable. All right. And so we've touched on the regional centres a bit. Do you want to expand more in terms of Mount Barker versus Aldinga and maybe some of the northern stuff more in detail?
Yes, so Mount Barker, because it has been a regional centre for some time, it has actually established its own credentials as an employment base in and of itself. So whilst there still is a significant portion of people who will travel from Mount Barker into Adelaide every day, which is not a particular imposition, it's still less than an hour's drive away, depending on traffic and as little as 45 minutes. So
compared to Melbourne, where we can be, 30 kilometres and still take an hour to get in.
Correct. Yeah. And I mean, really, I think it's not even really that far. We do have our Southern Expressway, so that is a significant assistant to get to and from. It's a controversial issue, but the government has been toying with light rail out to Mount Barker as well.
Oh, wow.
So there are certainly prospects for an improvement in that transport piece. But the probably historically Mount Barker has been agricultural industry related and is self-supporting in and of itself. Yeah.
Right, okay. So you probably have similar kind of employment opportunities in that area. And also, we didn't really talk about wineries at all. So
no, so look, winery, obviously South Australia wine are particularly synonymous. It's easy to forget it because we think about it probably every day. Right. But if you're not from here, then it's a huge driver. It drives tourism, but also as an industry of itself, which is exporting to Australia and the world. It's absolutely massive. I think we've probably got some of the best wineries in Australia, maybe controversial, but to the south we have our McLaren Vale region, which is obviously world famous, and to the north we have our Clare Valley and Barossa Valley. So all fantastic wine regions, all great employment drivers, but also great tourism drivers. So for a significant amount of cellar door opportunities, very, very high quality restaurants. I can recommend a few to you off air, but certainly a huge part of things.
Yeah, sure thing. And so with those three valleys, do any of the wine growers or makers, do they end up converting some of the wineries over into residential developments?
No, typically not. And so part of why these areas are so great for us is they're actually quite well protected. Right, so this is just simply via property zoning. So a lot of the winery regions right in that region will actually be protected and can't be subdivided. They are there as agricultural properties, and that's very, very unlikely to change. That's not a bad thing because it means that those employment drivers remain, those tourism drivers remain, but it does mean that surrounding areas can benefit.
Okay, cool. And so where would you see better opportunities, just going back to maybe some of the earlier points, down south because you're more locked in versus being further up north because there's more land? That the best?
Fundamentally, look, all provide great opportunity. In my eyes, fundamentally, south of Adelaide is slightly better. McLaren Vale, as the wine region down there, is really only 45 minutes to 60 minutes from the suburbs of Adelaide, which is just so incredibly close. If you compare that to Clare Valley, which is probably maybe an hour and a half, hour and 45. That has actually improved slightly with our Northern Expressway, which is a recent addition in the last few years. Having said that, I think I've referred to previously the landlocked nature between hills and coast. There's also a coastal element down at McLaren Vale where you can actually be sipping a nice glass of Shiraz and then pop in the car and in about 9.5 minutes be down at the beach. So that is a pretty cool offering.
It's very, very cool. Awesome. Look, that's all that we sort of wanted to cover in this episode on where to buy land. Next time around, we'll talk about how, and James, I'm sure, will go into a lot more detail on that side of things. Thanks for watching.